Good afternoon, brothers and sisters of the Dharma. I'm Choymi. Auspicious greetings. Thank you for joining us today to learn about calming negative emotions, brought to you by Fo Guang Shan, PJSS3, co-host by BLIA Dhammapada branch. Stress gives rise to negative emotion, which brings to distress and suffering. Before we proceed further with the topic for today, please let me remind you that you can post your questions in Zoom or YouTube during the Q&A session. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Brother Billy Tan, a certified master practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming (NLP), clinical hypnotherapist, also a laughter yoga teacher and a laughter ambassador, to share with us on how to cultivate the middle way to experience contentment and composure, to calm our negative emotions. Brother Billy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, sister. I'm very happy to be invited today to come and share the Buddha Dharma. I would like to thank Buddha's Light International Association and Fo Guang Shan, Malaysia, for inviting me to make this sharing. The topic of today's sharing is calming negative emotions. We're going to examine the teachings of the Buddha and apply the middle way to help us calm our emotions and also to help us purify unwholesome thoughts. So let us begin. The topic is calming negative emotions. The important thing is that when we experience things in the environment, it arouses stress in us. Stress is that internal changes in the body that arises and causes the body to be tensed. And all this actually begins to trigger negative emotions. And this causes what is called distress. So stress is the physical suffering. Distress is the mental suffering. And this is really causing us to have all kinds of negative emotions. And these negative emotions disturb us and make us think crazy thoughts. And it may even lead us to very severe, unwholesome states of thinking. So we have to be careful to observe that when stress arises, we must do something about it. Otherwise, it will trigger the arising of negative emotions and disturb the mind, causing all kinds of distress. The Buddha calls this dukkha. And the word dukkha is commonly translated as suffering. It is perhaps one of the most misunderstood words because dukkha actually means a lot of other things. Let me give you an example. There are many different manifestations of the meaning of dukkha. The most common and popular translation of the word dukkha is suffering. And of course, when people hear the word suffering, they tend to imagine it is something very severe. But sometimes it may not be anything severe, and yet we are still experiencing a form of dukkha. For instance, things are changing around us and things are always happening. And things are not according to what we were hoping for. So when all these things are always changing, we call it anicca. Things are impermanent. We begin to feel insecure. So insecurity, this feeling of insecurity is dukkha. At the same time, we have expectations. Now, if things happen not according to our expectations, we begin to feel dissatisfied. We are not satisfied with what's going on. And this feeling of dissatisfactoriness is also dukkha. Of course, commonly we call it suffering, but if you think about it, it can be something that appears to be very mild. But if we don't do something about it, dukkha can get out of control to the point that we become very, very stressed and distressed. And there are also other manifestations of dukkha: pain, sorrow, grief, lamentation, and so on. And also unhappiness, trauma, agony, and so on. But what I'm going to focus on today are the two very important aspects of dukkha: stress and distress. Stress is this physical suffering we're experiencing because our body is all tensed up, and this arises because of hormones being released in our body. Distress is when this bodily discomfort disturbs the mind And then the mind begins to go into mental proliferation. It starts to run away, having crazy thoughts. And then our mind becomes very disturbed. That is distress. So we're going to examine these two and what we can do about them by applying the middle way to help us calm our negative emotions and at the same time help to purify unwholesome thoughts that may arise. So what makes us stressed? I have grouped them into three major categories of activities in the environment that make us stress. Firstly, emotional encounters. Well, we can call them trauma. What happens is things happen around us and arouse emotions right away. It can be something very simple. It can be that we do something and somehow it didn't turn out the way we wanted to, and then we get very upset. So that is one simple thing. But it could also be something quite severe. For example, a dearly beloved person has just passed away. And that is a very extreme form of trauma that some of us may experience. So it is encountering these activities that arouse fear, anxiety, worry, and so on. So this is trauma. The second category is adversities. Things are not happening according to our plans. So maybe what we want to do, we may maybe fail to do it. So failures, and things don't turn out the way we plan. So they are disappointments. So basically, this is encountering problems, adversities, difficulties, and troubles, and all kinds of things in hindering our progress and our success in life. The third category are things that are always uncertain. The Buddha calls this anicca, impermanence. Everything is always changing, and we all experience this all the time. Uncertainties will lead to confusion, and they may even lead to us feeling lost, perplexed, don't know what to do, So changes, unfamiliar circumstances, unexpected events, all this lead to uncertainties that cause us to feel very insecure. So all these collectively are really what the Buddha described as dukkha. They are affecting us and cause us to feel this suffering inside, and that is dukkha. Let's take a look at daily example. It can also be very simple things, inevitable realities of modern life. So things are happening around us all the time. Everything we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, they bombard our sense organs. And then we have to pay attention because everything is changing. For example, we could be driving along the highway and then suddenly somebody cuts in front of us. So we have to be very careful. We have to pay attention to what's going on the road when we're driving. So all this is really bombarding our attention system. And this actually leads to stress. It could also be circumstances keep changing, uncertainties, right? And things are unpredictable. This leads to uncertainties and insecurities. And it could also be that our friends, our relatives, our children, our parents, our teachers, our students, our bosses, our employees, our friends, they put a lot of pressure on us. They have expectations. So they demand things and they have expectations, and all that puts a lot of pressure on us to respond. And it is very tiring to respond to other people's expectations. It could also be things that we have to do according to a certain timeline. So deadlines, schedules, all this drain our energy resources. We get very tired trying to maintain schedules and deadlines. And finally, things are often not the way we expect them to be. Obstacles, problems, difficulties. So all these around us happening, they will create a chain reaction. This emotional chain reaction is very unhealthy. Why? Because all this starts with things happening around us, and we begin to carry this perception of threats and conflicts. As you can see, all these things happening, these inevitable realities of modern life, they project in our mind this perception of threats and conflicts. Threats to our peace of mind, conflicts to our expectations and desires. So it is this perception of threats and conflicts that trigger a chain reaction that leads to negative emotions. Let's take a look at it from a scientific perspective. I'm not going to go so deep into the science behind it, but this is going to be very helpful if we have some basic understanding what's going on in our brain. So what happens is, if we were to look at the brain, it has evolved over millions of years into three parts. The oldest, most primitive part is called the brain stem, and that is our survival brain. That part of the brain keeps us alive. And then there is the middle part of the brain. Later, subsequent to that, the evolution leads to the next phase of the brain being evolved, and that is the limbic system. We call this the emotional brain. Many organisms and animals have this. So this limbic system is the emotional brain. When it is aroused, it triggers a chain reaction that leads to the release of hormones in the body. That's why we call this emotional brain. Now, at this point, I want to clarify one very, very interesting, very important point. A lot of people think emotion is something that happens in the mind. No. Emotion is something that first triggers a chain reaction of biochemical, release of biochemical, all these hormones, this biochemical chain reaction happening in the body, causing the body to be all tensed up. That is the beginning of emotion, and that reaction is caused by the limbic system, this part of the brain. Fortunately, for human beings and higher mammals, we have evolved with an outer layer of brain. The most modern part of the brain is called the cerebral cortex. This is the learning brain. This outer layer of the brain enables us to think, enable us to learn, enable us to solve problems. Higher mammals have it. For example, dolphins, chimpanzees. Right? But humans have the most evolved and most advanced cerebral cortex. With that, we are able to think. It is this ability to think that can help us solve many problems. So you can say that inside the brain, one part of the brain is responsible for our suffering because it triggers a chain reaction causing emotions. Another part of the brain is responsible for our happiness, and that is the cerebral cortex, the thinking brain. So let's take a look at this part of the brain that leads to negative emotions. Deep inside this emotional brain, we call this the emotional command center. There is a tiny little structure called the amygdala. Tiny little structure about the size of your thumbnail. That's all it is. Deep inside the middle part of your brain. And this structure is responsible for scanning everything that we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. Sensing for potential signs of threats and danger to the organism. So it is sensing things like temperature getting very hot, light getting very bright, or fast approaching object, and all this cause a chain reaction so that we react automatically without even thinking. We react, and then it protects us from harm. I'll give you some example. If somebody were to throw a basketball at you heading towards your face, do you have time to think and say, oh, that basketball is heading towards my face. If I don't duck, get out of the way, or if I don't knock the basketball away, it's going to hit my face. And if it hits my face, it's going to be very painful. Do we have time to think like that? No. It is this amygdala that is sensing everything we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. So when it senses a fast approaching object like a basketball heading towards your head or your face, it actually causes a chain reaction in the body, causing certain muscles to be all tensed, and then we're able to react to it either by blocking the ball or ducking. We call this the fight or flight reaction. Fight meaning when the ball comes, we knock it away. So we fight against the fast approaching object. Flight means we run away and escape from it. So we duck. So we either knock the ball out of the way or we duck. All this chain reaction is caused by the amygdala. This is why we can easily say one of the most important role of the amygdala is to become our bodyguard. It is our bodyguard in the brain. But unfortunately, the amygdala can also be aroused unnecessarily in a way that it actually causes harm to the body. And when the amygdala is aroused unnecessarily, it causes negative emotions to arise and causes us to behave in very unwholesome way. So this unnecessary arousal of the amygdala leads to behavior that is unwholesome, and therefore we call this the terrorist in the brain. So the amygdala has two paradoxical roles: bodyguard and terrorist. So what happens when the amygdala is aroused? The reaction of the amygdala is a chain reaction. It begins to send a message throughout the body, and the message reaches various glands in the body. And one of the most important glands that receive this message from the amygdala is the adrenal gland. So when the amygdala is aroused, it causes this sympathetic chain reaction in the body. This sympathetic nervous reaction in the body triggers the adrenal gland to release two very powerful hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. These two hormones causes changes in various organs in the body. For example, it causes the heart to beat faster. It causes our breathing to deepen. It causes our digestive system to be temporarily suspended so that the energy in the body can be used to fight against perceived threats. And it also causes the muscles to be all tensed up. And it causes hair to stand on end. It causes the pupils to dilate so that our eyes become more clear to see what's going on, to help us protect ourselves from harm. It causes facial expression, and this is a very primitive chain reaction, because what happens is that when animals are experiencing fear or threats, their facial expression become, very angry, as though to frighten away the predator. So what happens is that the predator trying to attack us, in ancient times when animals are evolving, so the animal actually goes into this very fearful mode to frighten away predators. So our facial expression will react in the same way. Facial expression get distorted, perspiration, body temperature rising, and so on, and blood sugar level released to help us convert stored energy into active energy so that we can fight or run away from the threat, the fight or flight reaction. But the worst part is that it actually suspends our body's immune system, because the body's immune system will try to prevent some of these things from happening. Therefore, one of the role of cortisol is to suspend the body's immune system so that now the whole body will react in such a way to help us, protect us from harm. This is all very unhealthy, you can see, because when the body immune system is suspended, we become susceptible to illnesses. When blood sugar level rises, we then experience high blood sugar. When we perspire a lot, we lose body temperature, and that can cause us to become sick. Facial expression distort too much, and then eventually when we get old, our face will be full of wrinkles. Pupils dilating too frequently, and when we get old, our eyesight becomes very weak. Hair standing on end, sooner or later there will be no more hair to stand on end because they will fall off. And muscles getting all tensed up. This is why it causes the body to be so tense. Some people think that, they go for they go for massages and then it helps, but it doesn't help. They got to learn how to reduce this harmful effect. And then this digestive system being suspended, it leads to ulcers, and the respiration, the breathing hasten, and that is not good for our health. And finally, our heartbeat beating faster and blood pressure rising. All these are very unhealthy activities that really harm our health in the long term. So if we don't do something to prevent the stress from arising, we will experience all kinds of illnesses as we age. And this is simple fact because of this fight or flight reaction caused by the release of hormones in the body. So I will now describe to you this diagram showing you the chain reaction of emotions. I call this the vicious cycle of emotions. We begin by looking at things happening in the environment. Everything is going on, and a lot of things are happening around us, and we are able to see, hear, smell, taste, or touch whatever is happening. So we become aware of something happening out there. And this awareness, we begin to interpret what is going on. And this interpretation, as I mentioned to you earlier, if it turns out to be all these things that are happening that disturbs us, and things that are unpredictable, things are not according to our wishes, we begin to have a perception of threat and conflict. We begin to think of this as threatening our peace of mind and in conflict with our desires and wishes. When the mind goes into that state of perceiving things as threat and conflict, it arouses emotions. And the beginning of the arousal of emotion, I mentioned earlier, is the release of hormone causing the body to be all tensed up. So now the body is experiencing great discomfort, the fight or flight reaction in the body. So this bodily discomfort disturbs the mind. And this mental disturbance is called distress. This leads us to behave in habitual emotional manner. This habitual emotional reaction arouses all kinds of negative emotions. And then we begin to experience greed. If it is something pleasant, whether it is something pleasant or unpleasant, the reaction is very similar. So we begin to experience greed, anger, fear, hatred, and so on. So all these are emotional reactions. And if we are not careful, if we don't calm our emotions at this point, it actually leads to more severe reactions. It causes us to cling on to the experience, and this clinging on to the experience leads to even a deeper version or deeper form of mental suffering. And this is called mental proliferation. The mind begins to run away with all kinds of unwholesome thoughts, feeding emotions with imagination, memory, and fear. Imagination of something that hasn't happened yet, memory of past experiences that hurt us, and expectations of trying to change things that are already right in front of us here and now. So all this actually causes even much deeper level of suffering. We really have to do something about this. So what can we do about this? Let's take a look at some of the things we can do. First, we got to do something about this stress reaction in the body. So this arousal of emotion leading to the bodily discomfort because of the release of hormones, this is the stress reaction. We're going to do something to stop this first. Now, if we're not able to stop this, it causes mental suffering. And then this chain reaction is called emotional chain reaction. And when it reaches that stage, it is very difficult to prevent or stop it from happening. You can't prevent it because when it's happening, then you got to do something to relieve yourself of this suffering. But by the time it reaches that last stage, it's very difficult for you to help yourself. You need some external assistance. Right? So this is what I call the vicious cycle of emotions. All because it started with our perception of threat and conflict. And this is the secret of where we can begin to do something to change all this. Whenever things are happening around us, as soon as we begin to interpret it as threat or conflict, it triggers this chain reaction, which is very unhealthy and leads to very unwholesome behavior. So we're going to do something about the way we perceive our circumstances. As long as we are able to prevent perceiving threats and conflicts, we have a chance of calming our emotions. In order to do that, let's take a look at a basic understanding of the mind. Now, we don't have to go very deep. We just have to examine what the Buddha said about mind as an activity. The mind is an activity. It is something that is happening. It is not an entity. There's a difference between what is an entity and what is an activity. An entity is an object, something that exists. You can feel, you can touch, you can hold. An activity is a process that is going on. You can only experience it. So the Buddha described there are three parts of this mental experiences we call mind. The first word the Buddha used is vijnana. Now I'm using Pali words from the Pali Canon. I think there are also Sanskrit equivalent, but I am able to use the Pali words and pronounce it better than Sanskrit, so I shall stick to the Pali word. Vijnana is one aspect of the mind, one of the three parts of mental experience. Vijnana refers to the process of perception. When we're able to see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, because we have the five senses. So vijnana is referring to the awareness, or they call it the consciousness, the awareness of what was perceived through our sense organs. And then the second word the Buddha used is mano. This is the cognitive process of the mind that leads to cognition and conception. Cognition is basically being able to identify what was perceived through your sense organs. And in identifying what you have perceived, you begin to give it some label or some name. You call it something. So this part of the mind is really the thinking part of the mind. It is also able to cognize. So cognizing the experience, meaning you become aware and you understand what is happening. And that leads to concept. That means you start to have an idea what is going on and you start to think about the concept, and then you have choices on how to respond. So this part of the mind leads to cognition and conception, and then you will be able to have choices how you want to respond. So this is really the thinking part of the mind. The third word the Buddha used is chitta, and this is called the affective process. The scientists or the psychologists refer to this as affective process. But the lay people like us, the common word for it is emotion. And it leads to mood and temperament. So this part of the mind is reacting to what we experience, whether we feel something to be pleasant or unpleasant. With every experience, everything we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, everything that we cognize and conceive, in the mind, we will consider whether it is something pleasant or unpleasant. And then this part of the mind, the chitta, the affective process, reacts to it. So if it is pleasant, we begin to react to it with lust and greed for the pleasant experience. If it is unpleasant, the mind begins to react to it with some anger and hatred towards something that is unpleasant. So the reaction is reacting to feelings of what we have experienced from the environment. Not only that, this part of the mind, the chitta, also personalizes. It comes from the root word, the Pali root word upadana, personalizing, but other translations of the word upadana also means clinging, grasping, attaching. That means when something happens out there, the mind begins to think, it is happening to me. I am affected by it. So the I, me, or mine, the thought of the I, me, or mine becomes very strong. And this is really this clinging or grasping to the experience, personalizing it, thinking that it is I, me, or mine being affected by the experience. So this makes us cling to this notion that we have a self, but this notion is really just an illusion. It is this illusion of self-centered emotions or self-centered existence that we think is going on around us. So this is really the three parts of the mental experience we call mind. Vijnana, the perception of what we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch through our sense organs. Mano, the interpretation of what has been perceived and able to identify what we have experienced and create concepts and choices. And chitta, the emotions that react to the feelings, and also causes self-centered thinking, self-centered delusions. So these are the three parts of mental experience, the three words that the Buddha used to describe the mind. So I hope that helps you understand basically what's going on in this thing called the mind. So now let's listen to my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punanji. He has taught me well. I have learned a great deal from him. So I'm going to share with you a short video clip of him explaining how this emotional mind called the chitta, how it dominates us and controls us and makes us feel spellbound by it. So let's listen to Bhante Punanji.
So in the human being, the thinking part is called mano, whereas the emotional part is called chitta. But the Buddha pointed out was, what has to be done is not to obey the chitta. What is happening today is that the mano part, the thinking part, is doing what the chitta wants. You see, chitta is dominating the mind. And the mano is just catering to the chitta. There is a verse where the Buddha says, Chittena niyati loko, chittena parikassati, chittassa eka dhammassa, sabbeva vasamangvagu. What that means is, chitta is dominating the world. Chittena niyati loko. Loka is the world. Chittena niyati loko. Chittena parikassati. Chitta is disturbing everything. Chittassa eka dhammassa. Chitta is that one thing. Sabbeva vasamangvagu. That everyone is spellbound by chitta. Everyone is dominated by chitta. Like being spellbound. So therefore, the only thing is to learn how to gain control over the chitta, the emotional part.
Okay. Okay. You heard Bhante explain there how to gain control over the emotional mind. So what can we do about it? What happens? Bhante was describing this. This is what happens to us. And this is the words of the Buddha, where the Bhante translated it as, emotions dominate the world. Emotions create distress. Emotion is that one thing to which all are spellbound. So in other words, if we are not careful, emotions will control us and we have to do something about it. And when it controls us, it causes mental suffering, distress. And the Buddha stated this very simply, very clearly in this Dhammapada verse number 42, where the Buddha said, then this is what he called self-affliction of mental suffering. Whatever harm one enemy may do to another, or one hater to another, one's ill-directed emotions inflict upon oneself a greater harm. That means that there are people who may dislike us, there are people who may want to hurt us, but if we are not careful with our emotions, if we allow our emotions to get out of control, it can actually cause us a greater level of harm and suffering. In our own emotions, our own ill-directed emotions can actually cause us a greater level of suffering than what people who dislike us may do to us. And this is because our mind running away with mental proliferation, with imagination, memory, and expectations. And when that happens, the mind begins to get into trouble. It gets lost and our emotions control us because we are beginning to imagine things that hasn't happened yet. We're beginning to think back on things that have long gone and disappeared, but we are remembering the hurt and the feeling that it was hurting us. And we are having expectations, hoping to change things that are already the way it is. And all this leads to a greater level of suffering. So we have to be careful not to allow the mind to reach this stage of mental proliferation. This gets out of control. So now, let us listen to Bhante Punnaji once again, and listen to him explain from the Dhammapada verse number 1, which Bhante translated as cognition precedes all experiences. Right?
The first verse in the Dhammapada, in the first verse in the Dhammapada, what you get is Mano Pubbangama Dhamma, which is wrongly translated today. There, Mano means the thinking part. I told you there are two things, the thinking part and the emotional part, which is called Chitta. Mano Pubbangama means the thinking part comes first, before the emotional part. So it is by changing the thinking part, which is what is called the cognitive part, that the affective can be controlled. So it is the thinking part that is able to control. And that is the real secret discovered in the modern world by the cognitive psychologists. They are using that in what is called cognitive psychotherapy. They are using that principle, but still they are not able to fully control the emotions because they don't know about meditation. And but the Buddha used this method.
And you have heard Bhante explain that even modern cognitive psychotherapy, these modern psychologists, they are beginning to understand what the Buddha has taught. Their findings basically are fully consistent with the teachings of the Buddha. Right? So basically, it's the way we interpret our circumstances. So when we interpret our circumstances with threats or conflicts, and this is the thinking part of the mind that interprets it, it leads to the arousal of emotion. That's why the Buddha stated in the first Dhammapada verse, it is our thinking that comes before everything that is happening. So in other words, everything that is happening within us arises because of the way we interpret our circumstances. And that leads to emotional arousal. So by changing our interpretation, our cognition, the way we think, Emotional arousals can be calmed, can be reduced. And this is also the finding of modern psychology, and the modern psychologists, they are now referring to this aspect of psychology as cognitive psychotherapy, where we have to learn how to overcome our emotional distress by simply changing unhelpful thinking, unhelpful thoughts that may arise. This is very important. And therefore, by perceiving our circumstances not with threat or conflict, by perceiving our circumstances with peace and harmony, that emotions are not aroused and we can remain calm and composed. And this is what the first verse of the Dhammapada was saying about. Cognition precedes all experiences. It predominates and creates them. Cognition, the way we interpret our circumstances, create our own reality in the mind. If with vicious thought, that means if we start to think in an unwholesome way, with vicious thoughts or cruel thoughts, if we were to speak or act, we will cause suffering, and suffering will follow us like as though it is the wheel that is following the hoof of the animal that is drawing it. See, the Buddha was very wise. He used this animal and the cart as an example of suffering. So if we were to think in unwholesome way, it actually causes suffering. And using the animal and the cart, it represents suffering because the poor animal is drawing this cart, and this cart is a very heavy burden, very painful. So all this is suffering that will follow us. Therefore, if we are not careful with the way we think, and if we were to think and act in unwholesome way, wicked way, or vicious ways, we will cause suffering upon ourselves as well as others, like as though it is the wheel following the hoof of the animal that is drawing the cart. Modern psychologists have come up with a lot of interesting teachings that are very consistent with what the Buddha has already taught. Take, for example, this very famous psychologist from the past, William James. He stated it very simply. The greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another. And this is exactly what the Buddha said in the first Dhammapada verse, choosing your thoughts. If you chose unwholesome thoughts, wicked thoughts, vicious thoughts, then it causes a lot of suffering. So the greatest weapon we have to help us reduce the stress, that is, to be able to choose good thoughts. This is why this teaching of the Buddha is so important. Think good, speak good, and do good. This is a very important teaching. And with that, we will reduce suffering upon us and upon the people we interact with. And another very famous psychologist and psychiatrist, Viktor Frankl, he is actually a survivor of Nazi concentration camp. He was a Jew, and he was arrested and put into this concentration camp. And one of the concentration camp he lived in, this very famous one, is called Auschwitz. So he was put in concentration camp. But he survived. Fortunately, because he was a doctor and they made use of his skill as a doctor, so they spared his life. But even living in that prison, he was suffering. But he learned how to apply his mind in the right way to help himself to reduce the suffering he went through. So he came up with this very famous quotation here. He said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Okay, let's now take a look at it line by line. He said, between stimulus and response. What did that mean? Now, things happening around in the environment, they stimulate our sense organs. We become aware of what's going on. And then the mind begins to think about what's happening, and then the mind begins to want to do something, to react or respond. So in other words, things are happening around us. He called that the stimulus. And then the mind processes what's going on, and we begin to want to do something. And that is our response. So he says, between things that are happening around us and the moment we begin to respond or react to it, there is a space. Now, what did he mean when he said space? Space really, here he meant a moment in time. There is this moment in time where we have the opportunity to choose. We have the power to be able to choose our thoughts. So in that space is our power to choose our response, to choose how we want to respond to what's going on. So we have this moment in time where we can think about what's happening and then choose good response, helpful response, instead of reacting like an animal, right, without thinking. So, and if we were to choose good response, this leads to growth and freedom. Freedom from suffering. Here, freedom meant freedom from suffering. So if we were to choose good thoughts, speak good words, and do good deeds, it will help us grow and free us from suffering. And this is really what Viktor Frankl meant when he made this quote. So this clearly explains that psychologists are beginning to discover exactly what the Buddha has been teaching 2,600 years ago. Now, how can we help ourselves with this learning here, this space? There is a way to help us to expand that space, allow us a greater opportunity to choose good thoughts. I call this the 3-step self-compassion practice. So what is the 3-step self-compassion? First, pause. That means when something is happening out there and it arouses our emotions and we begin to feel tensed and our body begin to react, we feel the hormones flooding through the body and our heart is beating faster and so on. When you realize that is going on, pause. Do not react right away. By pausing, you allow time for your emotional excitement and your anxiety to calm down. And at the same time, because these hormones are being released, you are also allowing the hormonal reaction to subside. The next step is to relax. By relaxing, you are actually extending this space, this moment in time. So relax so that your whole body can be all calm. So this can be done by simply taking a deep breath. Take a deep breath, relax your body, and consciously compose your mind to respond. And now you have a chance to choose your thought, because now you have made this space available to you to choose your thoughts. And then you think. Well, THINK is an acronym. I'll talk about that later on. I'll explain the acronym later on. But think. It allows you to process what's going on and think about how you can respond. So it helps you to purposefully focus on wholesome and beneficial response to the problem. So if you are able to pause and don't react right away when your emotions are aroused, and then you just relax a little, take a deep breath, and then think about how you want to respond, then it can help you choose wholesome and beneficial response to the problem. And this is very much what the Buddha called the middle way. The middle way, I also call this the medial way. Basically, it's the same. The medial way or the middle way, same. Right? When the Buddha delivered his first sermon, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra, the sermon where it is the beginning of the turning of the wheel of Dharma. So the Buddha warned the 5 ascetics that the Buddha was speaking to, that there are 2 extremities to be avoided. And the first extremity is reacting to sensual desires. That means when emotions are aroused, we react to our emotional urges. So basically, it is indulgence in these sensual pleasures and sensual desires. Whether you want to lust and greed for something, or you become angry and hatred towards something. Expressing of emotional excitement by releasing tension in action. So the Buddha warned, this is one extreme to be avoided. The other extreme to be avoided, the Buddha warned, is self-torment and self-mortification. The suppression of emotional urges by withholding our emotions, withholding all the tensions, and this is really very painful. So the Buddha warned both expressing our emotion in action or withholding our emotions and tensions. All these will also lead to great suffering. The Buddha knew this because before the Buddha became enlightened, he was Prince Siddhartha. As Prince Siddhartha, he was living in a palace. In fact, he had 3 palaces, one for the winter months, one for the summer months, and one for the rainy seasons. So he was actually enjoying a great deal of sensual pleasures living in the palace. He knew, right, what these sensual pleasures are all about. And of course, one day the Buddha decided to give up his princely life and renounce and became an ascetic. So he went into the forest. He learned from 2 teachers, and then he went into the forest with 5 ascetic friends. And there they practice asceticism, which means they are thinking that in order to do good and be good, they must withhold all their emotions. They must force themselves not to react. This forceful effort is very painful. So both are causing a lot of suffering. This emotional reaction to sensual feelings, that means when your emotions are aroused, you react, or withholding your emotions by forceful effort, forcing yourself not to react, both will lead to a lot of suffering. The Buddha taught there is a middle way, or the medial way. Now at this point, I want to basically share with you my own experience. Many years ago, when I first read about the medial way, I didn't know much better. I thought the medial way was a little bit of indulgence and a little bit of restraint. That is not the middle way. Some people think the middle way means, oh, never mind, enjoy a little bit, it's okay. Never mind, withhold a little bit, it's okay. That is not the middle way. The middle way is not a little bit of this and a little bit of that, because the Buddha was very clear in his instructions. He said, both extremes are to be avoided. Neither of them present any solution. The middle way is a third way. And what is the middle way? The middle way, in summary, is conscious relaxation. When your emotions are aroused and now you're getting all excited, one extreme is, reacting to your emotions. The other wrong way, the other extreme is withholding your emotions. Both are wrong. Learn how to relax. That means when your emotions are aroused, pause. Don't react. Relax. And then when you're able to do that, then you are able to bring your attention inwards. This is introspective attention. The modern term for it is called mindfulness. Bringing your attention inwards. Mindfulness is really introspective attention. Bringing your attention inwards to observe what is happening to your body? What is happening to your feelings? What is happening to your emotional states? What is happening to thoughts arising? And when you're able to observe these things, then you become wiser. You become aware how it is affecting you. These are what we call the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Activity of the body, the feelings of these activity, and the emotional states that are arising, and the thoughts, the way thoughts arise in your mind. So these are the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So by bringing your attention inwards, you are now becoming very mindful what is happening and how it is affecting you and how it is leading you to react or behave in unusual ways. And finally, when you're able to do that, you're able to cultivate a state of calm and peace and composure. And the mind can still. And stilling of the mind, the Pali word for it is called samadhi. That brings the mind to a state of stillness. And this is really mental equilibrium. Bringing the mind to a state of stillness and calm so that now the mind is perfectly calm and stilled. Now you are experiencing a level of bliss, a level of happiness which money cannot buy. This happiness is not founded on pleasures. This happiness is founded on peace of mind. So you will experience this happiness. All this, the Buddha explained in great detail how to practice it through this Eightfold Way. So the detailed explanation of the methodology behind this is really the Eightfold Way. Now, I don't have any time to really go into talking about the Eightfold Way, so I won't elaborate on that. But basically, that is what the Buddha taught. When your emotions are aroused, learn to practice conscious relaxation. Pause and relax. Bring your attention inwards. Be aware of what is happening, how it is affecting you, and then you can think clearly how you can respond in a wholesome way. And the middle way is conscious relaxation, whereby you do not react right away. Consciously release the tensions in the body, calm your mind, so that you now pause and relax. And then you begin to think, bring your attention inwards, introspective attention, gently bring attention inwards, mindfully observe bodily and mental activities. Then you can understand how it is affecting you. Now you can think about how to respond in a wholesome way. And finally, this will lead to peace of mind, mental equilibrium, where you are able to still your mind, free your mind from these emotional arousals and excitements, and suppressing these 5 hindrances. See, the mind is constantly engaging in these 5 activities that are disturbing you and causing you not to have peace of mind. They are the 5 hindrances. So by practicing the middle way, you can learn to suppress the 5 hindrances and cultivate stillness of mind, samadhi. Right? So this is the state of stillness of mind, which my teacher calls mental equilibrium. And a lot of people overlook this breathing. I mentioned to you about breathing. So it is the most critically overlooked relaxation tool. It easily relaxes the body and calms the mind. How does mindful breathing help us? It increases natural unforced oxygen intake. This is food for cells. It stabilizes heart rate and blood pressure. It regulates the body temperature and blood circulation. It restores and maintains homeostasis, which is actually a state of stability in the body. And with that stability, you will be able to experience peace and comfort. And calming the nerves, so your nervous system is being calm and indicating an absence of threat, so your emotions will not be aroused. And finally, bringing your attention and awareness to the present moment, here and now. And with this level of mindfulness, you will be able to experience a state of peace and calm which money cannot buy. This is blissfulness. I'm going to teach you one simple, very helpful breathing technique that can help people calm their emotions very quickly. It is called LSD breathing. Of course, LSD, that some people think, oh, LSD, that sounds like the psychedelic drug. No, it's not. I'll explain what LSD means. Basically, this method is to help you consciously allow your breathing to slow down. And this helps to relax the body and calm the mind. The important word, the key word here is to allow. Do not exert effort. Do not force your breathing to slow down. Simply just let it slow down. Allow. Right? So L stands for long. So first, you just let your breathing to go on longer. So allow the breathing to flow longer. Ask yourself right now, how fast is your breathing? Most people right now are breathing at this rate. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. So each way, it is really 2 or 3 seconds only. That is too fast. Learn to slow it down. Breathing in and breathing out. If you are new to this method, maybe start with 4 seconds. So you breathe in 4 seconds and then breathe out 4 seconds. Do it by allowing, not forcing, right? Allowing. Just let your breathing go on a little longer. And you begin with that. And then as it goes on, then let it slow down by itself. The more you focus your mind on slowing your breathing, the breathing will slow down by itself. So you allow it to slow down further. And as it slows down further after a while, then allow it to go in deeper. Take in deeper and then breathe out deeper. So LSD means long, slow, deep. Right? So let's try this now. Okay? Breathing in, allow it to breathe in for 5 seconds. Ready? Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now breathe out. 2, 3, 4, 5. Breathe in. 2, 3, 4, 5. Breathe out. 2, 3, 4, 5. Continue. Now, if you were to do this regularly with a bit of practice, it becomes natural. And then you can take it from 4 seconds to 5 seconds, and finally, eventually, from 5 seconds to 6 seconds. If you can do this naturally, easily, and take it up to 6 seconds, no need longer. 6 is maximum. Take it up to 6 seconds, you will find yourself very calm, very relaxed, and your mind will be completely free from emotional thoughts because your mind is focused on this slowing down of the breathing, allowing it to slow down. Right? The mind can only do one thing at a time. So allowing the breathing to slow down as you focus on doing that, your mind will not be thinking about yesterday's problems or tomorrow's worries. Your mind will be focused on slowing down the breathing. You are now living in the moment, here and now. Right? So this is a very helpful technique. I hope whenever you feel emotionally aroused, practice this method. Now let's listen to another very famous psychologist. I think many of you know him, Daniel Goleman. He's the author of many books on emotional intelligence. So here, in this video clip, Daniel Goleman is going to be talking about emotional intelligence.
Stress isn't really so much in the things that happen in your life. It's really in how we react to them. And we can do something about those reactions. There are 3 windows of opportunity when it comes to handling the stress in our lives. The first is to do something to change things for the better. You know, whatever's the cause of the stress, if you can change it, do it. The second is in how you see it, changing the way you perceive what's happening. Now, if we can't change the things that are happening to us and we can't change how we see it, then we're left with a third opportunity, and that's handling the way our body and our mind react to these things. See, when the body is stressed, the emotional centers flood the body with stress hormones. And this makes it do things like shunt blood from the arms and the legs into the organs. It's a fight or flight response. It pumps up our blood pressure, speeds up our heartbeat. It steals energy, actually, from the immune system, it turns out, to get us ready for an emergency. It's what's called the fight or flight response. You've heard about that. Now, if that response gets triggered day after day, week after week, and month after month, over years, what happens is the biological system in our body that's most susceptible genetically, that's most reactive, is going to start to develop a stress-caused disease. You know, if you're a cardiovascular reactor, you're going to get high blood pressure. If you react in your gut, you're going to get problems there, and so on throughout the body. That's how stress over years and years leads to disease. It speeds up the process of coming down with the disease. So constant stress, it's like getting your amygdala stuck in high gear. Continual hijacks. We need to calm down. That's where relaxation comes in.
Okay, you've heard Daniel Goleman mention about the windows of opportunity, where he said by remaining calm and relaxed, we have 3 windows of opportunity to reduce stress. So the first, he says, change our circumstances. Basically, by changing our circumstances, we are getting rid of the problem, and this is, of course, the desirable outcome. If something happening is troubling you, disturbing you, by changing your circumstances, you get rid of the problem, then problem is solved. That is the ideal solution. An example of changing our circumstances. Let's say you happen to be in the office or somewhere with a group of friends, and everybody is talking about politics. And then you know what it is like when people talk about politics. Some people may take different sides, and then they start to argue with each other. Then there's a lot of very unwholesome words being exchanged. So you're caught in the middle of that discussion where people are starting to say words that are very nasty and things like that. So how do you change your circumstances? Well, you can't stop people arguing. What can you do? Turn around and walk away. Just walk away from it. Now, by walking away from this unwholesome discussion that is going on, you are changing your circumstances. So this is an example how you can change your circumstances to get rid of the problem. But unfortunately, sometimes things happen in such a way we may not have the opportunity to change our circumstances. It could be that you're sitting there at a gathering, family members having dinner. In the middle of the dinner, an argument arises. You can't just walk away. Unless you want to upset some family members. Or we even have a situation where all of us are experiencing it in the past several months. The coronavirus pandemic. Not a single person in the whole world, not even the smartest scientists in the whole world, can stop the coronavirus pandemic. So we can't change our circumstances. We're all caught with some kind of travel restrictions and MCO, CMCO, and quarantine and all kinds of things. We can't change those circumstances. So when we are no longer able to change our circumstances, what can we do? We can change the way we perceive our circumstances, the way we think about it, right? The way we imagine what is happening. And this will help us to find inner peace, calmness, and comfort. I'll give you an example, a good example. In March, when the travel restrictions started and everybody had to be quarantined at home, and we were experiencing this emergency MCO where everybody has to stay home, nobody is allowed to go out. You know what has been happening for the past few years before that? I have 2 daughters, and both of them are staying with us. And for the past couple of years, they were both very busy with their careers. So they were always coming home late and very tired, and during the weekend, they want to go and chill out somewhere else. So the family has very little chance, very little opportunity to spend time together for some time, for a few years. But during the coronavirus pandemic, starting March, there was such a lockdown, everybody had to stay at home. That was a wonderful opportunity for us to bond. I perceive the coronavirus pandemic lockdown as the greatest opportunity for family bonding. We were all spending a lot of time together at home, cannot go out, and then we were joking and cooking, and then we were all getting all anxious about the news of what's happening. So there was a lot of bonding going on. Therefore, we perceived that not as a threat. We perceived that as an opportunity for bonding. And that is how I changed the way I perceive this coronavirus pandemic lockdown. Right? Now, apparently, with the 3rd wave coming on, the lockdown is starting again. Okay, good. I'm spending more time with my daughters again. So this is really to change the way you perceive your circumstances. And if you're not able to perceive your circumstances in a wholesome way, what else are you left with the last option, which is to change the way you respond to your circumstances. So we responded to the circumstances by just enjoying every moment together and help each other learn how to cook. In fact, our cooking skills all improved. So this is really changing the way we responded to our circumstances. But I also like to share with you another real-life example that happened to me many years ago when I was a young executive. I was late 20s. I joined a very large multinational company, an international company. That time, there were many multinational companies in Malaysia present. I joined one of them, a very large one. And there were many departments. And this multinational company, they pay very well. So I was getting a way above average salary. I was very happy with my job, my money, the money I was earning. At late 20s, money was the most important thing, earning money. And I was then transferred to a department where the boss, a local boss, very nasty guy. He never appreciates whatever you can do. So in other words, when he tells you to do something and you don't do it exactly the way he wants it, he gets very upset and starts scolding people. And even if you do it the way he wants it, if you do slightly not correct or something he's not happy with, he starts scolding people. And even if you did a wonderful job and you did everything perfectly and you did a great job, he would not say thank you. He would find faults with you. So he was always constantly scolding people, sometimes even using foul language. And I could see some of my female colleagues at the time, they were so scared and they were actually so depressed. Some of them were even near to tears whenever the boss was scolding us. And I realized that was not healthy for us. So I changed. Well, I couldn't change my circumstances. I mean, that company was paying good salary. I wasn't going to leave the company. I wasn't going to quit the job. But at the same time, I can't get rid of my boss. What can I do? I can't kill him, you know. So I changed the way I perceived his scolding. Every time he scolded me, I just thought, gorilla escaped from the zoo again. So in my mind, I was thinking, every time he shouted at us, I'm thinking, here goes the gorilla again, screaming away. Now, when I think like that, what happens to me? I start to feel quite happy. In fact, I was having a smile on my face. So the boss scolding at me was a bit curious. Why every time he scolds me, I'm smiling? So, in fact, that helped to reduce the frequency of him scolding, you know. So that is how I changed the way I perceive my circumstances. In fact, I even changed the way I responded to the circumstances. So in between all the scolding, when things are quiet and he's sitting at his desk and I'm taking a coffee break, I will walk up to him and say, "Hey boss, I'm going to make a cup of coffee. Would you like one? I'll make one for you." So I changed the way I responded to him. I responded to him with kindness. You know, people like that, rough people like that, if you are angry with them, they are not afraid of you. They will get more angry with you. But rough people like that, when they are angry with you and you are kind to them, they don't know what to do. This is a fact. If ever somebody is nasty to you and you are kind to that person, watch his reaction. He doesn't know what to do. He's lost. So when I started to change the way I responded to my circumstances by offering to make a cup of coffee for my boss whenever there was an opportunity, he started to think, oh, this is a nice guy. Maybe I shouldn't scold him so much. You know. So that worked. So that was how I changed the way I perceived my circumstances, changed the way I responded to my circumstances. In fact, I actually did one more thing, change the circumstances. No, I didn't kill him. What I did was I got to know his boss. And I started to share with his boss how good I was at certain other skills that are useful in other departments. So I convinced his boss to transfer me to another department. And he did. It transferred me to another department where I actually excelled in my career because that boss in that other department was a wonderful guy. So I actually changed my circumstances by getting myself transferred to another department, and I was still earning good salary from a multinational company. So this is how I actually applied this. At that time, I didn't know about this, you know, and yet what I did was exactly what Daniel Goleman spoke about. So now, how can we transform this vicious cycle of emotions into virtuous cycle of composure? Things are happening around us, and then we begin to perceive it as threat or conflict, and emotions are aroused. Now the body all tensed up, and we begin to behave in habitual emotional reactions. Negative emotions are aroused. What can we do? Well, when the body is all tensed up, be mindful. Mindfulness of changes in the body, and be aware that your heart is beating faster, heart rate rising, breathing, and so on. When you are aware of these changes going on in the body, you then practice pause, relax, and think. By doing this, then you are able to calm down and compose your mind, ready to respond with good thoughts, and change the way you perceive your circumstances. If we can change our interpretation, we can tame our emotions. So therefore, when things happen, begin to perceive them with peace or harmony. Don't perceive them with threat or conflict. And by perceiving things with peace and harmony, your emotions are not aroused. In fact, you are now experiencing emotional composure. Your emotions are composed. And your body is not tensed up anymore. You're feeling more relaxed. Bodily comfort sets in. So now you're feeling comfortable. Your mind is composed. Now you can begin to think clearly. THINK is a very powerful acronym. I will explain that in the next slide. Purposefully focus on wholesome response to the problem. By doing that, you will be able to cultivate wellness, comfort, peace, and happiness. So how can we apply THINK? THINK is an acronym. Apply this every time you want to speak or you want to act, or with every thought you carry. T stands for truthful. So whatever you think about, whatever you want to do, make sure that it is truthful thought. H stands for helpful. Make sure that whatever you think, whatever you say, whatever you do will help you feel better, help you recover from the troubles. I stands for improvement, improving. Make sure that every thought, every action, every speech improves the situation or improves your relationship with the people you're dealing with. N stands for necessary. Not everything is necessary. Sometimes things could be true, but it is not necessary to say it. So if it is not necessary, don't say it. Finally, the most important is K. K means kind or kindness. With every thought you carry, with every word you speak, with every action you take, always do it with kindness. This is THINK. Truthful, helpful, improving, necessary, and kind. So you can apply this every time you think, every time you speak, every time you act. All this can be summarized as humanistic Buddhism. We are practicing humanistic Buddhism. And the definition of the word humanism from the Merriam-Webster dictionary beautifully describes this process. So the definition says, a doctrine, attitude, or way of life centered on human interests or values, especially a philosophy that usually rejects supernaturalism and stresses on individuals' dignity and worth and capacity for self-realization through reason. In other words, it is really centered around human interests and human values. That means we as human beings, we have the ability to think and act in wholesome and wise ways. So therefore, we treasure this. This is the human interest and the human value. And reject supernaturalism. That means don't start believing in all kinds of magic and superstition. Let go the superstition. Focus on what you can do. And this focus, place it on self-realization through reason. Self-realization through reason simply means that when you see things happening around us, think through it carefully and realize what is going on. And if you are able, when you practice this, you are actually practicing mindfulness. When you practice mindfulness, you become aware of the reality of what is happening. And then you start to realize what is good for you, what is good for the people around you, and how you can respond in such a way that it is helpful, not harmful. This is self-realization through reason. When you practice this, you are really practicing this humanism, humanistic practice. And I'll show you another quote by Viktor Frankl, right, where he stated, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And this is really practicing humanism, self-realization through reason, changing ourselves, not depending on everything around you to be changing. We can't change the world. We can't expect the world to change for us. We have to change ourselves to appreciate and enjoy the world. So when we are no longer able to change our circumstances or situation, like the coronavirus pandemic, then we are challenged to change ourselves. So when we leave the house, take the necessary precautions because there are many standard procedures that help us. Put on the mask, wash our hands, carry sanitizers, stay away from the crowds, and perform social distancing. So all this can help us change the way we respond to our circumstances. Then we can enjoy life better despite all this coronavirus pandemic. Don't allow it to control you. Learn how to tame your emotions and change the way you respond. So I hope this has been helpful. Let's summarize what I have covered, calming negative emotions. First, recognize this stress is happening, freeze, fight, or flight reaction that's going on. Realize that this disturbance to the body can disturb the mind if we are not careful. So we got to learn to calm down and practice pause, relax, and think in order to calm down and focus your thoughts on something that is wholesome and helpful. And remember, just recall these 3 windows of opportunity that Daniel Goleman was talking about. And of course, choose to perceive your circumstances with peace and harmony, and with every thought, every speech, and every action, consider THINK for peaceful response. And I'll finish off with this quote from my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punaji, who said, "The purpose of human intelligence is not to discover truth, but to solve problems." What problems are we trying to solve? We are trying to solve the problem of dukkha, the problem of suffering. So when you are in a situation where you're experiencing suffering, don't try to figure out who is right, who is wrong, because this is what some people do. That's where they go wrong. They try to prove who is right, who is wrong. So trying to discover what is the truth of what's going on. Whose fault is it? There are still people around the world trying to figure out whose fault is it this coronavirus pandemic is going on, and a lot of people are blaming Wuhan and whatever. But the point is, that is not the important thing. The important thing is to solve the problem of suffering. So that is the gist of this message from my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punaji. So let me wrap up everything with this last quote from the Buddha, the wise words of the Buddha in the Mangala Sutra, where the Buddha said, when faced with changing vicissitudes of life, changing vicissitudes of life means a lot of things around us are always changing, anicca. And all these changes are affecting us. All these changes are disturbing us. So they are called vicissitudes of life. If emotion can be stilled and remain undisturbed, free from grief, cleansed of defilements, and liberated from fear, this is the most supreme bliss. And these are the words of the Buddha in the Mangala Sutra. So I hope this sharing has been helpful to you. Learn how to practice pause, relax, and think in order to calm your emotions, relax the body, right? And hopefully you can now then think on more wholesome and peaceful way to solve your problems. So I'd like to just let you know with this last slide here, you can download from this link the file, a PDF file of all the slides that you have seen. So if you want to review this video again, now you have the slides and you can go through what I have presented. If you have any questions, please feel free to put it under the comments. And if you have any questions after all this is over, you have my email address there and my Facebook contact. So please get in touch with me and let me know your questions. Meanwhile, we will answer some of the questions that have been posted. So thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
That is enlightening, Brother Billy. Thank you for sharing your insights with us. And we have received some questions from Zoom and YouTube. We can go along with the questions from the audience. Let's go for the first question. Brother Billy, you have mentioned about slowing down breathing. Are there any other helpful breathing exercises?
Yes, slowing down breathing is one of the good ones, but there is another one that is also very powerful. It is called diaphragmatic breathing. That means you're using your diaphragm focusing your mind on your diaphragm to activate and exercise the diaphragm. You see, that diaphragm is that muscle that separates the lungs from the stomach, the bowel system. So by exercise, what happens is when you breathe in, the diaphragm flattens out. When you breathe out, the diaphragm curves back up. So by focusing on this flattening and curving of the diaphragm, you are actually exercising the diaphragm. So that's why they call this the diaphragmatic breathing. Now, the good thing about diaphragmatic breathing is that you see the diaphragm is connected to a set of cranial nerves called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerves go all the way into the brain, and it actually, when it is activated, when it is stimulated by exercising the diaphragm, stimulation of the vagus nerves causes the release of a very powerful hormone called endorphin. Endorphin is the hormone that actually helps to heal the body. It is the hormone that relieves pain. They call it the painkiller, and it is also the hormone that helps to boost your immune system. So when you breathe and exercise your diaphragm, you are stimulating the vagus nerve to release more endorphin, and this endorphin causes your body to be stronger, and at the same time relieving some of the discomfort and pain in your body. And this is very helpful for relaxing the body and calming the mind.
Okay, thank you so much, brother. And brothers and sisters, it's time to laugh more now. Okay, we have a second question. It says, when facing a difficult decision and you don't know if your decision will affect wholesomely or unwholesomely, how to decide without stress?
Okay, the Buddha actually taught a technique to determine whether something will be helpful or harmful. In fact, this was explained very well in the Kalama Sutra. A lot of people, when they talk about the Kalama Sutra, they're very focused on those 10 things that the Buddha warned about, and that is, when you see a speaker who is very skillful, don't have to necessarily believe him. When you find it written in the text, doesn't mean we have to fully believe it, and so on. But actually, the Buddha ended up by explaining there are 4 stages where you can determine whether a particular thought or a particular teaching is going to be helpful for you. First, whether it is free from ill will or it is with goodwill. That means whether that particular decision you're about to make, is there any ill will in there? That means any negative or bad intention, ill will. Or is it imbued with goodwill? That means is it something which is some kind and helpful and compassionate? So that is the first criteria, free from ill will. The next is whether it causes harm to other people unknowingly. That means you may think it is the right thing to do and you may think it is helpful, but somehow when you do it, without realizing it, it actually hurts other people. Typically, this is something that you may want to say, you think is truthful, but sometimes not everything that is truthful needs to be said out, because some truthful words, they're not really necessary, but by saying it, it could cause other people to feel a bit hurt. Like a person who is very fat, and you say to that person, "Wow, you look so fat." Well, maybe that is the truth that person is fat, but it is not necessary. So this second step is that, is it something that can cause people, that can hurt or harm people, even if it is unintentionally? So you have to examine that. Right? The third is it something that is practiced and praised by the wise? That means you look around at other people, what would they do? You look at other wise people and people who have accomplished a great deal, especially people who practice Dharma, and you ask yourself, is this something they would decide on? Is this the way they would do it? So you can maybe look upon a teacher, a master, a senior venerable. Would the senior venerable say this or do this? So you use them as an example to help you, guide you, whether it is something that is praised or practiced by the wise. And finally, the fourth is that, will it lead to goodness, wellness, and peace and harmony? That means if it is something that you say or do, something that you practice, in the long term, Will it actually bring you peace and harmony? Will it bring you happiness and wholesome outcomes? So these are the 4 stages where you examine what you're about to say, what you are about to do, whether it is the right thing to do or not.
Thank you, brother. So, brothers and sisters, is doing the right thing, saying the right thing at the right time. Okay, we have one last question here. It actually talks about, okay, you mentioned bring yourself inward. What do you mean and how do you do this?
Yeah, I think maybe the question misunderstood. I didn't say bring yourself inward. I basically meant bring your attention inwards. In other words, bring your attention inwards to focus. Now, the thing is that this is really what is called mindfulness. Mindfulness is the ability to bring your attention inwards to observe how something is affecting your body. That means first the body. Secondly, how it is affecting your feeling. Right? And thirdly, how is it affecting your emotional state? And fourthly, how is it affecting the way you think? So those 4 things, we call these the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Your bodily activity, your feelings, your emotional state of mind, and the way you think, your thoughts arising. So by practicing this mindfulness, you actually help yourself to calm down, because when you observe what is going on, whatever that is going on begins to fall into a state of equilibrium. So if you are feeling, let's say you're feeling agitated, but instead of reacting and you are just bringing your attention inwards and observe yourself experiencing this agitation, with this observation, this experience of agitation begins to calm down and be put to rest. So in other words, when you observe this excitement, the excitement calms down. And that is something that is very helpful. And this is really the benefit of practicing mindfulness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, brother. So, Brother Lily, thank you so much. And we know you're a busy man. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to share all this valuable learning with us. So, brothers and sisters, in conclusion, the path to liberation entails the constant betterment of our physical, verbal, and mental needs. These are simplified by Venerable Master Xing into the 3 acts of goodness as a practice of mindfulness. Do good deeds, say good words, think good thoughts. 做好事，说好话，存好心。With that, that's all for today. And before we end the session, let us dedicate the merit that we have acquired for sharing the Buddha Dharma today to all the beings, or all the living beings, affected by the coronavirus pandemic around the world. May this world be free from the turmoil of the outbreak. May each and every one be safe and healthy. Please join your palms together. May kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity pervade all worlds. May we cherish and build affinities to benefit all beings. May chant, pure land, and precepts inspire equality and patience. May our humility and gratitude give rise to great vows. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Brothers and sisters, we hope you will put into practice the lessons that we have shared today. That's all for now. Once again, thanks for joining us. Stay tuned for more Dharma Talks brought to you by Fo Guang Shan PJSS3 and BLIA Dharma Pala Branch. Till we meet again, take care, be safe, bye-bye.